Swinburne University of Technology.
Hi, welcome to another talk for the PhD Hub. Today we have Professor Darren Tofts joining us from Media and Communication. And Darren is a specialist in the field of cyberculture and digital art. And we're very lucky to have him because he is retiring in a couple of days' time, so basically like 48 hours left on the job. So we thought this would be a really good opportunity to record some of his expertise in the field of supervision and get him to talk about his experience with supervising PhD projects. So Darren, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the introduction, Julian. I should clarify, I prefer to be abdicating than retiring. That's what I've been telling you, because as I'm still around the place, I'm still kind of here, but stepping down. So, but I'll take the term anyway. So, but thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And so I thought we might start by just talking a little bit generally about what you see as the primary challenges for starting a PhD project. Because many of the people watching are probably either in the process of putting together their research proposal for the PhD, or in the early days of their candidature and probably just finding their feet. So,
I think just in terms of the context of actually starting it, many years ago there was a conference of postgraduate students at the University of Melbourne, and the keynote speaker was Helen Garner. And she said something that's always really stuck with me, because I was probably just starting my PhD at the time, and then since I've supervised many students to completion, I've given them similar advice. The way she described it was that there's a kind of not a solitude, but there's a kind of almost a sense of a journey that has to be taken. And she described the role of taking candidature in a PhD as being like the journey of the long distance runner. Yeah. Not necessarily the silence of the long distance runner, but it's a kind of a journey. And I think you need to initially, for any prospective students seeking candidature, you need to be mindful that it is a commitment. Yeah. I think, and again with respect, there's been a culture broadly, certainly within Australia and overseas, to see it as something that has to be expedited, gotten as quickly as possible. Do you want a tenure track? Yeah. It's not going to work. Yeah. Basically, the PhD candidature itself, as a process, as a journey, has to take its course. And so I think if that mentality and that perspective of how the thing will run, and you will run with it, is part of your thinking, you're already ahead, I think, in terms of another candidate that might just be hanging out for that fractional position to come up, so they can already be half through their PhD to get onto it. And again, I don't want to sound cynical with that, but I think it's just part of the cutthroat nature of what does it mean to have a PhD now? Well, it's a gateway to a university job. Yeah. And another, well, it should actually be something that is a major piece of research that you do, probably the most significant piece of research that any student may do. They might write a book after that. They may just work hard as a teacher or something like that. Yeah. So, but to bring that back to your question, though, I think a similar care and vigilance about what am I actually doing has to come into the process of writing the application. Not just ticking the boxes. Yes, I would like a scholarship. I'm only doing it half time. All the things that have to be done. I think that vigilance has to be there, really anticipating this is a time commitment. Yeah. Yeah. Not just a year, not just 2 years. I'm going to have life in the meantime. You could be married, you could be in a relationship, there could be other stuff going on in your life that you've got to manage. And the PhD should never take precedence over that. It has to be built into the fabric of who and what you are and what you're doing. And so I think, again, to hopefully answer your question pertinently, it's really that sense of being aware that this is not just a box-ticking exercise to get the PhD, to get the application in. You're really signing off on a big chunk of your life given away to this thing.
Yeah, I think that's really important advice. So in a sense that you have to think, not just, you're probably not going to be dropping everything in your life just to do the PhD, and at the same time, you have to think about, how you're actually going to keep up the commitments for the PhD, which are substantial. So
absolutely. Well, even that, even the perception that you may have, you may be fortunate to get a scholarship, so you have some finite time off. It's still a commitment to give that time, because it's equally very tempting to, well, I'm not working, I don't have family commitments, so I'll just get back to it when I want to. And that focus is really crucial, whether you have the benefit, and I'll say rather maybe churlishly the luxury of a PhD, but I think, sorry, of a PhD scholarship, but I think it has to be something that you do build into the whole sense of this is a holistic way of living, and this is part of it, it's not going to dominate everything, but I still have to give it time, but I still have to give other things in my lifetime as well. So I mean, it was interesting just what you said a little bit earlier, where of course there are a lot of
pressure on students to get completed within a reasonably short space of time, which is 3.5 years, which seems like an ocean when you're at the start of the candidature, but goes very quickly. And often that's part of doing the career development to get them on track for a university position. But then again, I mean, a lot of students will be entering the PhD looking for a university position or an academic career further down the track. But then equally, a number of people may be doing it because they genuinely want to research this topic, or they want to give themselves space in their life to kind of think and put a book together. So it's not necessarily just a professional commitment.
Absolutely not. In fact, two quick responses to that, and I'm glad you said that, because one of the best PhDs I ever examined was a woman who was in, at the time, her 80s. She was the first woman in Australia admitted to the bar. And she had finished a prestigious legal career and simply wanted to do a PhD. And it was absolutely wonderful, and she just devoted her time to that as a pleasure that she now wanted to do. And so there wasn't any rush to get it done, because she knew some appointments were coming up in a department somewhere and could apply. And so I think that love of what you're doing is important, whether it is just a labour of love for pardon me, someone who's worked all their life and wants to do a PhD, but equally if you are aspiring to an academic position, you still have to invest it with some sense of yourself, some passion of what you're doing, rather than it is filling out the big long form for an ARC grant, but it takes 3 years to do it. It has to be more than just, as you said, a ticking the box exercise that I'll now be equipped to get on the line. Because the simple fact is, and I hope the nature of these discussions, I think, have to be candid and constructive, is that, look, it's being tougher and tougher to get university jobs, whether it's starting from the bottom, being a sessional tutor and working your way up, which is part of the apprenticeship to some extent of doing that. But the more and more the education sector and education itself as a medium in a way is changing. A lot more stuff is either being outsourced, a lot more is based on media packages that you'll work with that stand in a way in lieu of a teacher or a tutor. But again, I know that might sound gloomy. Of course, there are still tenure tracks for prospective staff. There are still academic jobs available, and who knows how the university sector is going to change in the next 2 years. So, probably more, I'd say, dramatically than even. I mean, I did my PhD in the 80s. I mean, even more dramatically than then. I mean, I think if you think away the university's going, who knows what it's going to be like in 10 years' time. I certainly, I mean, there was no such thing as the internet when I started doing my PhD. Then that transformed everything in terms of the world of work, but also transformed the work of doing a PhD, because so much of what you could research could be done online rather than having to go to the Bailey or to the board chart.
Well, that's another interesting topic we could touch on, because, I mean, the PhD, as you're saying with Helen Garner's talk when you saw it in the 80s, I mean, she mentioned it as kind of a solitary journey of a lot of the time. And a PhD is often quite solitary and isolating for the student doing it. They only really have a connection, sort of a formalised connection a lot of the time with their supervisor. And I suppose with the internet now, it becomes much easier to sort of segregate yourself from university life to a degree, and do your research online, do your work at home. And what would you say are the difficulties or challenges of that for a student?
I think it really is highly disadvantageous because the more dialogue you have with not only people doing PhDs, but doing at different levels of doing a PhD, having recently done a PhD. Because some of the best examples that I can give of my own experience are talking to people that either had finished a year ago or were just submitting, because you do get it's like a sedimentary kind of record. You get a very different sense of what does it mean for someone. What's your mindset when you're just about to submit? Do they feel comfortable? Do they feel cocky about it? Do they feel, oh, look, it's okay. My supervisor said it's okay. I'm a bit shaky, but I'll trust their judgment.
I felt done.
Exactly. And then there's the thing, I don't want to know about it anymore. Get it off the desk and whatever. So, but there is really a strong sense of it is a process, and it does. This is partly, I think, why Garner's analogy was so pertinent, because there is an end point. Whether it's the finish line or whatever we think the finish line is in some ceremonial way, handing over those 3 bound volumes or burning the drafts, whatever is catharsis for you, it doesn't really matter. But it is very much a process, and I think a lot of the time it does help to be in dialogue with colleagues. It could be your supervisor, or it could be other students you're working with, or it could be even a student who may be a candidate who may be in the middle of their tenure and of doing it in their candidature, and so again, the long-distance journey doesn't have to be a solitary one.
And this is probably a great reason for, even if you're not on an academic career path or don't think that you are, for attending and delivering papers at conferences, as it connects you with, you know, a much wider peer network.
Absolutely, and it does give you that sense too when you're talking, could be over a coffee or a beer at the pub, that, oh, you're also having difficulties. Oh, you're at that same point I am. I've run out of literature in terms of the resources I've been working with. There's not much there, and I'm finding my findings are a bit thin because, and to hear that other people, you know, it's not just you. This again is that solitude motif. You know, that it's easy to fall into this idea that everyone else is just rocking along. It's going great, but why am I the one that's suffering? What's wrong with me? And so seminars, participating in seminars, it could be at the faculty level, it could be at a short conference that RMIT might hold for postgrad students. It's always important to get involved with that for a lot of reasons, not only to strut your stuff and to get it out and see what people have to say about it, but to also participate in these kind of dialogues.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, one can even take advantage of the internet for finding a peer network for support as well.
Absolutely.
And it's possible now to join PhD communities, follow PhD blogs all over the world, and that. While face-to-face connections and networks, I think, are really important. One can also find people online for that.
And also too, because I know colleagues in media who have been doing this for a number of years now, are having sort of small, very small, intimate kind of workshop reading groups, where it could be. You know, you might come along and say, look, I've really been struggling with this chapter, and well, bring it on, let's discuss it. And that can be useful, and of course it's very constructive criticism. You're not going to be told it's shit or anything. You'll basically be told, look, I had a similar issue with something I was doing, and here's how I kind of dealt with it. And just even to hear, it's okay, other people are struggling with it too, because quite often it's so easy to fall in to this kind of mania that it's all about, this is my problem. I'm the only person in the history of doing PhDs that's having a problem with it.
Great. So coming back to some of your experience, can you talk maybe about some of the different models of PhDs that you've worked with in the past?
Sure. Well, obviously traditional, what are called so-called traditional PhDs, where someone writes a PhD thesis or dissertation, and it's usually around 80, 90,000 words, and you're given 3 months to examine it, and it's a thesis, a thetic argument in that sense. It begins with a proposition, it's responding to a question, it's ideally trying to break knowledge into some knowledge field, and you do the work of becoming a voice, creating findings or creating a theory or an idea within that space of a new idea. And that's obviously the more traditional model of PhD. The other model, of course, is the model of what's called a PhD by artifact and exegesis, which, believe it or not, has been around for a lot longer than it probably became an orthodoxy in Australia. I'd say probably in the certainly from my experience of examining them in the late 90s into the 2000s, where basically you again work within the framework of a research question, a critical question, but the nature of your output won't necessarily be a 90,000 word thesis. The output may be in a form of media, it may be an installation, it may be a suite of short fictions or dialogues. Again, all of these things are still driven by a research question. You're not simply doing something in a space beyond a critical form of inquiry. You want to inquire, but the medium, the nature of your medium, is not simply the traditional thetic argument or theoretical argument. And the other extension of that I've been an examiner of for many years are basically within art schools, where it could be an aspiring artist in a number of different media. I've examined PhDs in this form in terms of a suite of paintings, a suite of digital animations, a suite of soundscapes. So the same thing, that the medium has changed in terms of beyond the written word and the discourse of a written argument or thesis to do with a suite of paintings may explore an idea. I think the very first one I examined many years ago was in fact looking at Norwegian death metal.
Wow.
It was looking at death metal culture, but it wasn't writing a thesis about it. It was producing a series of images based on the vocabulary of that and exploring that vocabulary in a suite of large-scale paintings. Then, of course, there was a written exegesis that went with that was pretty much like a little thesis. Here's the research question, here's what I'm interested in about it, what am I trying to respond to in relation to this question? And so then it argues the case, and then it may look at some case studies of previous artists that may have done this. Then, of course, you have to evidence, well, if this is a PhD, you have to evidence something that is new to the field. That could be a new visual style in the case of what this artist had done, and then that's articulated clearly in the exegesis. Or again, in terms of, say, someone working with electronic music. I've examined PhDs where students have been working towards creating soundscapes for people in palliative care. What does it mean as a sound artist to provide in, say, a hospital environment ambient music that will be beneficial to someone who's dying or someone who is in ill health? And this has been a very important sort of outreach between sort of academia, the university, and public institutions like hospitals. So the same thing, the installation would be made, it would be documented, a portfolio may be presented that has photographs, a diary of on particular days, and responses. There may have been a questionnaire that was given out to patients or to their carers, and then that is written up again in something like, I use the word exegesis, but it's pretty much like a small thesis. But instead of developing a written argument from the course of that, it engages with and critically responds to, again, field work done, the theory behind that field work, how it went, what were the findings of it, and what were the outcomes of it. And particularly this happens a lot in this kind of research, is what further work can be done, do you think? And usually, so there might be some speculation on, well, it's quite clear the ambient nature bothered a lot of patients. They would prefer maybe small, like a broadcast radio, there'll be a small suite of times when the music comes on. So for further research, were I to go and do more of this, say working in a children's ward, I might take that into account too for the next, and so that becomes the sort of the future study kind of part of the conclusion.
Yeah, great. Well, looking at these two models of PhDs, I mean, it's really interesting that they both have to be driven essentially in the same way, with the research question, with some kind of context and awareness of scholarship, research, other work, artistic work and practice in the field, and a kind of theoretical perspective. But going with your experience of acting as examiner and having examined these different models of thesis, what are the differences between that process of the experience of examining them? I mean, what different things are you looking for in the traditional PhD versus the PhD by artifact and exegesis? Sure.
Well, the former from what you've talked about is easy to respond to initially because it's quite clear. It's like students write an undergraduate essay. A bigger brother version of that is a PhD because you've clearly got a question you're responding to. And you have to, the burden of the essay is to respond critically and forcefully, cogently to that question so that you have offered a detailed response. Of course, it doesn't mean an answer to the question, but it's a detailed engagement with the issues that the question gives rise to. A PhD is to some extent no different from that. The only difference is, though, is that, say in an undergraduate essay, even in an honours essay, you're more than likely working with a field of research that pre-exists. So, for example, you might write an essay on Russian Marxism and its impact on literature. So, of course, there's a whole body of work, not only primary work, going back to Russian formalist theory or whatever, but then you have to do your research on who has done similar theses to this in the meantime. So I have to be aware of their work. And so you have to then create a critical engagement with that body of work to present your perspective. So in terms of what the field emerges after that, the Novitz thesis will be there, and I can take that off and, okay, so this is a very recent thesis. This must be pretty on the ball because it's got 50 years of this criticism and theoretical work into it. So how does it work at that level? Which is, of course, what an examiner will be looking for. But again, in the other model too, it does present interesting a kind of longevity in terms of what will people make of something that, by and large, they may only be able to see in terms of a representation, in terms of, say, a documentation, a suite of, or a portfolio of images, or a file. Whereas a lot of the work is quite often site-specific. So again, it may be in the VCA gallery, or it could be, in some instances, I've examined them, they're actually in the city. So it's trying to build an art experience into the built environment, and it will only have its time. It will be installed for this week, and the City of Melbourne's only given permission for that. So as an examiner, you have to go and examine it in situ. For, say, someone else, I'm fascinated with that work, I've heard about it, and my research is similar, I'd like to look into it. They're looking at it after the fact, and so they'll be looking at documentation of it. So the experience of it is slightly different. But that's just the nature of the way these kind of practice-based material kind of PhDs work, is that often it will have its moment and then it will be documented in detail after the fact, or even within the thesis. And then for people looking back on it as part of the field, you are kind of looking at it in the past tense, and quite often you're looking at audio-visual documentation of it than the real thing. But having said that, I think because there's such a sense that these things really do, if you're going to document, it has to be documented exhaustively so that there can't be any questions left undone. So, for example, if it's in a public space, there would presumably be interviews with people like Vox Pops who happen to be there. Yeah. So you can get a strong sense of, on the Wednesday of its last day, there were some really interesting comments by passers-by, and here's the documentation of it. So it still fulfills, in a way, an ongoing extension of the thesis, but it's just no longer examinable. It gives you a sense of what it was like in situ, how it was examined, and here's a response to it that's been logged in some way.
Great. Yeah. So I thought one question I definitely wanted to ask you today was when we, in either the traditional PhD or the PhD by artifact and exegesis, student has to formulate their research question with an awareness of I suppose pre-existing scholarship and research in that area, artistic practice, and also theory and theoretical perspectives. How do you find students usually adjust to or meet the challenge of formulating their ideas in terms of theoretical perspectives and prisms within the early stages of the PhD?
That's always, there's no easy answer. No easy answer. The simple fact is some students who, particularly students who may be coming straight through from having done honours, have got a sort of a very rigorous sense already of what it means to go out and do primary research. So in some instances that's a very straightforward thing to do because it's part of their learning as a researcher to do that. In some instances, someone might be coming back from many years' leave from academia, and of course, as you pertinently said earlier, the whole vibe's changed. There's this thing called, the Google search now, and we can find stuff. We don't have to go to the Bayou. Even library collections now are usually online, have been scanned. So the nature of what it means to do research is very different. So, but there's always again a relativity to do with who the person is, the time in their life they're coming to the PhD, and then what sort of either training or experience they've had with looking for this kind of work or not. But again, this I hate the term that's come up around a lot of new media theory over this idea of digital natives. To some extent, yes, that's true. There's a kind of generational savvy about this, where people exactly know how to use search engines. They know they will absolutely get. They're going to devote a comprehensive week to sort of creating a huge database of everything that's been written on cockatoos or something, and they've got that, and that's easy to do. But even that is still, databases are databases, they're not complete. So there is still that sense of that traditional, very rigorous scholarly attribute of not only immersing yourself in the field, but mastering the field. And ideally, if you've done a master's before that, or even a very rigorous honours degree, you've already got a taste of what that means to, before you even utter a word or write a word, you have to be speaking with absolute authority.
Great. And maybe we just talk a little bit about advice for, I think particularly with the traditional PhD or the accompanying exegesis for a artifact and exegesis PhD. Do you have any advice for students in terms of the styles of academic writing, how they should express themselves in these types of formal scholarly arguments? Sure.
Well, it's not really advice. The simple fact is, if someone is writing a traditional PhD, it really has to be in that kind of scholarly kind of discourse. It has to... It has to be very clear, very cogent. It has to work within a kind of analytical framework. It has to cite references, and it has to be referential as well as reverential. It has to be aware that there's a lot of voices that have come before that person, and so and you would write it as I say, it's a big, chunkier version of an undergraduate essay, with a lot more detail and rigour built into it. In terms of the other model, that's got a lot more flexibility within it. In some instances, an exegesis may, again, simply be a critical account of, pardon me, how I made this work, the influences that went into it, but it's, of course, done on a much shorter framework. In other instances, there's room for more of an autobiographical placement of yourself, so not that in different kind of detached third person. It is you, and particularly in writing PhDs by artifact and exegesis, that makes perfect sense. In fact, as I was clearing out my office the other day, I found a PhD I examined from a student who was very interested in the work of Gregory Ulmer, who's a very important figure who has done this very thing. He's blurred the idea of what any kind of critical discourse can be. It can have different registers. One of them can be autobiographical, one can be figurative, one can be poetic. There's a space within academic work for different kinds of voice. And this particular one I'd examined was someone who was writing through some of those registers for his experience of living in northern Queensland. So it read more like a kind of a piece of ficto-criticism. It was almost like a fictional work engaging with critical ideas. The voice was very different. It wasn't that disengaged, disembodied voice of the PhD candidate. It was, this is very much about me. And so it's what we would call autographical. It's basically an autobiography, but it's aware of the voice as an instance of writing that's your instance of writing, not, again, the disembodied voice. So, and again, these are things that do exist, they'll continue to exist, they'll continue to change. The thing for students is to, again, probably in prospective PhD candidates, that is, to talk with their supervisors, even their friends, students, colleagues that are either doing a PhD, completing a PhD, what actually is going to best work for them for the outcome of what they want to do. If it turns out, you have you're a very kind of lyrical person with words, and you feel you can express yourself in other certain kind of poetic registers rather than, again, sort of analytical, referential sort of speech that we use in PhDs. You have to go with what is going to be most comfortable for you to do. Because it is coming back to that journey metaphor. You have to put a lot of investment into this thing. And if you're in the middle of 3/4 down and think, oh, actually, I don't think it's really working. I've been practicing a bit of third person stuff and I'm really better at that, actually. And so it's really important to even initially try, under the, again, supervision of who you're working with, your team, try a few drafts. It may work really well. You might find, you're giving yourself a little bit of even pre-submission time to for the actual submission for candidature to practice some sort of, again, more poetic autobiographical writing and think, this actually really works well for me. Or your supervisor might say, look, I've read some of your critical stuff and you're much stronger there. So it has to be a dialogue. It can't just simply be a vision. I've always wanted to do a PhD like this. I'm going to do it like that. Because there really has to be that kind of dialogue with yourself, with friends, with colleagues having done PhDs, with your supervisory team, to think about what is going to be the best outcome.
And I suppose part of this journey that you undertake with the PhD is about finding the appropriate voice both for yourself and for the type of research that you're doing, and whether that's a formal analytical, scholarly PhD voice, or if it's something a little bit more personal and subjective, then that's a discovery that the student's likely to make for themselves.
And writing's writing. We're writing different registers all the time, but the key term there is PhD. You are actually still writing a PhD. So even if I work on a land artwork, if I supervise someone who's done a land artwork, I don't get any first-hand experience of that work, but I see lots of documentation which is submitted as part of the exegesis. How then does the voice relate to that artwork? What's the story it's telling me about the experience of the artwork and how it contributes to some idea of land art or pardon me, art and the environment? But I think too, again, that dialogue of coming back to with the supervisor of really forgetting, put aside for a moment what is best for me to work with. The thing you just can't get away from, it's a PhD. It's mandated by the university. It's mandated in terms of having a certain credential of this is really the kind of highest thing you can do in a university. There are huge expectations of you that are historical, and the weight of that can't really be underestimated. But having said that, I don't want to seem prohibitive or too forbidding. It is something that is the thing that really has to be reckoned with. Not just, oh look, I'm really interested in Ren and Stimpy, and I really like the way Stimpy talks. I'm going to write like Stimpy. Sure, there might be a space for that. There might be a place for that, but is it going to work within a PhD?
You have to, I suppose, negotiate that with the formal requirements of the degree, what they say on the forms for each review, what work you have to have done. But I suppose there is still room for a great deal of flexibility in some ways, and particularly with the artifact and exegesis model in terms of finding a different voice or different mode of expression that might, with some justification, still meet those formal requirements.
I mean, I would hazard a suggestion too, that I still think, even though we've had many years now of alternative models of presentation across a whole range of sectors in the university, my personal feeling is, especially from examiners, certainly from examiners that examined PhDs of some of my own students, there's still a very strong bias of a kind of orthodoxy around analysis, reference, expertise, contributing to the field in a way that is cogent and communicable. So I think that is something equally to be that's a discussion that I know happens a lot with most PhD prospective students and their supervisory team is, okay, well, that's a very vibrant and ambitious idea. Who would examine it?
Yeah, yeah. So I suppose the baseline is the traditional PhD is what most examiners are going to be most comfortable with and use that as their reference point. And then the further you stray away from that model as a student, the more work you're going to have to do to justify or anticipate potential problems in understanding or communication as from a kind of examiner's standpoint.
Absolutely, but equally be mindful of, okay, well, there are 3 examiners in the States who I know are very interested in alternative pedagogy and alternative forms of discourse, alternative forms of research, of even thinking about what research is. I've read their work, and the supervisor may be totally unfamiliar with them, and so therefore that dialogue is incredibly important because
really good advice. So keep an eye further down the track on who would eventually be examining the.
Well, those decisions I think really have to be very early in the piece, rather than you finished it, you're having a coffee. How do you reckon we should get to examine this thing? And I know I'm being flippant there. I know that doesn't happen, but I think. It's in terms of the matrix of, if you had, say, a grid or a spreadsheet of I'm just starting my candidature, what are the things I really need to be aware of now? And one of them clearly has to be prospective examiners, because again, if you are looking at, say, a piece of, say, you're into serial music or computer-based music, you need to be aware, well, this is a very sort of avant-garde kind of thing. You're not going to send it to someone like, Herbert von Karajan or someone who's a very traditional conductor who, this is what music is. You might send it to Brian Eno or someone, a Brian Eno type of person who they're interested in the avant-garde, they're interested in pushing boundaries, they're interested in taking the vocabulary of music in a different direction. But even that, and this is a very quick commercial too, is that that doesn't mean they will be a brush over or they will immediately pass it. They'll be rigorous, but they will at least be sympathetic to what you're doing in advance of, they may find it, they may not be interested to examine a traditional PhD. So you're into music, right? Into sound. Where's the sound? I don't want just to write about sound. I want to hear instances of the soundscape, sure, especially if you say from RMIT working in sound there and working in ambient sound. I want a suite of works as the ostensible body of work to be examined, and an exegesis that goes with it. So those things are really quite important, and I think the earlier those discussions happen, the better.
And this could be another great reason for attending conferences and being part of a research community, is that you get to potentially meet and sort of sound out people who might examine your thesis at a particular point further down the track.
Absolutely. And a lot of good things about those, specifically PhD and postgraduate student conferences, is you may well have a panel on examination. You may well have a panel on, there'll be a suite of speakers at different levels of their candidature and giving their experience of what it's like. But I think the key is not to just presume if someone you've got your eye on from the University of Florida is, they're doing everything. They've done a lot of stuff that I'm kind of really interested in. It doesn't in advance mean they will be favourable. They may be a good person to consider for, but you shouldn't just presume, well, they're doing what I'm sort of doing. Let's get them, because they'll be sort of really sympathetic.
That even might make them more hostile to the argument.
Absolutely, I've seen instances of that.
Controversial.
I have seen instances of that. Because again, it's a bit of a shame within academia. There still is a little bit of protecting one's turf a little bit, and so there is a lot of homework to be done with you and your supervisory team about, even in the early days, of just even keeping a checklist along the lines of who could be a good person to approach.
That's excellent advice. So I thought maybe we could wrap up with any final advice you might have to a PhD student that we haven't covered here, or any particular pitfalls you might want them to avoid early in their candidature.
I think the biggest pitfall is being overwhelmed by the sheer how long have I got to do this thing? Even though it may be mandated by a scholarship, or what the university expects you to have this done in 3.5 years or 4 years, there's still that, you've got to get up every day and work on it. You've still got to go to a library, you've still got to go online to start creating your own databases from previous databases. So it really is not only a long-term thing that you're going to be doing this, and next year you'll be doing it at the same time of year, but you're doing it every day. Or every day. You might be teaching 12 hours a week just to keep going, the household going, but you still got to work that within it. And all those kind of contingencies are really important to think that it isn't again some kind of wonderful aesthetical visionary thing that you're doing that makes you special. Sure, you're doing it in a way that your local, you know, milk bar owner isn't doing it, but they've got their life to live too and commitments. You've got a life to live and commitments as well as being a PhD student. And I think it's a matter of really keeping those balances in check to not be overwhelmed by, look, I haven't worked on it for 3 days because my young child has got the measles. That's okay. Shit happens. Life gets in the way. We have to live life with this thing, and you just have to, I think, develop an attitude. Okay, well, I'm writing the next 3 days off. I'm not even going to be anxious that I haven't done anything about it, but I will get back to it. And it's that. Then I'm back to it now, and I think from my own experience, when those kind of glitches happen, you really can make up for that lost time simply by being determined to get what's done in the time that you need to get it done, and forget that you've even lost time. And I think they're all, again, personal strategies that there's no rule, there's no guidebook to point on page 25, this is how you do it. Everyone will find their own way, but at least is it being aware that it is okay if things get fucked up, if you can't do it, if it's, even if you need a week off. And from my own experience, you do occasionally need to think, I need a week off. Whether it's writing a book where you've just finished a chapter, I would always have a couple of weeks off to just forget about the thing and then come back fresh. It is part of your life. It's not some aloof Zen thing that you just do.
Great. That's really good advice again. So I think we'll wrap up here. So thanks, Darren.
No, thanks, Julian.
And sharing all this with us. And thank you all. We'll see you next time.
This has been a Swinburne production.